Wednesday night, 4 astronauts were hurtling toward the moon. For the first time in 53 years, human beings left orbit. And on that same night, the very same night, the President of the United States addressed the nation about a war that's now in its second month, a war that has killed school children. Both of those things happened on the same night, on the same planet, by the same species. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. Because this week of all weeks, we are being asked a question, and not by me, but by everything that's happening around us. Who do we want to be? Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Rob Volpe, the empathy activist, author of Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis, One Conversation at a Time. This is the newsletter and video series where we explore empathy, what it is, why it matters, and how to use it to show up better for other people and for yourself. Now, I'm recording this on Good Friday. It is Easter weekend. Passover began on Wednesday, and this edition of Reading Between the Lines is probably one of the most ambitious things I've written in this newsletter, and I want to take you through all of it, so let's go. Reed Weissman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. 4 names worth knowing. The first Black astronaut, the first woman, and the first non-American to travel beyond Earth's orbit, all the way to the moon. Now, if you haven't watched the Artemis II launch footage, I am going to link it in the description. Please watch it. It moved me to tears. I was so inspired. And think about what this launch represents. This is a rocket built by thousands of people across dozens of countries, and all of them are choosing to do something extraordinary together, and a crew that represents all of us. That is us. That is what we are capable of when we decide to reach. And then there's everything else that happened this week. So you're probably aware, the United States and Israel are now well into the second month of a war with Iran. Leaders made decisions with apparent certainty that this would be swift and surgical, and it has been neither. The missiles and the retaliatory strikes have hit civilian areas across the region, and a U.S. strike actually hit an elementary school in the city of Minab, Iran, and killed more than 170 people, and most of them were schoolgirls. You see, and the thing that gets me is those students did not vote for this war. They didn't lobby for it. They didn't have a seat at any table outside of their classroom or in their home. But decisions that are made by people who are certain that they know best often have the most devastating consequences. And the people who pay the price are rarely the people who made the decision. So yes, we are going to the moon, but this is also us. And meanwhile, also us are the Epstein files, which continue their slow crawl into public view. Now, I've been conducting interviews for Navigating to a New Normal, that longitudinal research study that I launched during the pandemic, and in this cycle, I've been asking the participants about the Epstein files. And what I heard surprised me, because it's not just outrage. One participant, Ricardo, who's a Hispanic man in his mid-70s from Northern California, he told me that, well, what we've always said for years and years, especially from the streets and poor poverty communities, that behind the rich and famous's closed doors, there's all kinds of secrets, end quote. No one was terribly surprised that the powerful are operating by different rules, but the disregard for the social contract is cutting deeper than the anger itself. It's unveiling what I'm calling the grief of disillusionment. Another participant, Kelsey, mid-30s, white woman living in small-town Maine, she's built her entire career on the belief that working hard within the system is enough. And she told me that the release of the files and what they contained is making her ask, and I quote, "How are we ever going to have the society that we believe we could or dream that we could?" And then Dejan, who's a Black man, late 20s from Phoenix, new parent, he told my colleague that he had known for years that the world operated this way, that he wasn't shocked. But he described it as, quote, more enraging than anything, because, as he told us, it reminded him of something deeply personal. A close friend's sister was lost to sex trafficking, and then his friend disappeared as well about 6 months later after that friend had begun investigating his sister's death. Everybody in that study is experiencing grief. This creeping, disorienting grief about the society they thought they lived in. And there are more files coming. Now, we've got this dark side of humanity that's showing up, but there's also something bright that's happening. And it's worth pausing on this Easter weekend and in this period of time. You see, Passover began on Wednesday, the same night that Artemis II launched. And Passover is this story of liberation from bondage. People were crushed by an imperial power, yet freed through something greater than that power. And the instruction at the Seder table is very explicit. You were once strangers in a strange land. Do not let yourself forget it. Easter is the story of a man who healed the sick, defended the condemned, touched the untouchable, and fed the hungry, and then was executed by the state, and then rose. In Christian theology, the resurrection is the ultimate reversal. The one the empire humiliated is the one who endured. The powerful were certain they had won, but they were wrong. In both of these traditions, and in their different ways, they are asking the same question this week. What do you do with power? Whose suffering do you allow yourself to see? And who counts as your neighbor? Now, I also want to name a pattern that I think actually connects everything that I've just described. Back in June of 2023, I wrote a newsletter about the loss of the Titan submersible. I put the link in the show notes. In that situation, OceanGate's CEO had dismissed safety certifications, thinking they were obstacles to innovation. The passengers became de facto test pilots, and 5 people died. At the time, I called it textbook hubris. This belief that the rules don't apply to you, that the objective justifies the risk to others, and that you just already know. And over the last week or so, I keep returning to that piece because hubris, it turns out, it's not one thing. There's actually at least 3 faces, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. So the first one is the hubris that destroys the hubristic. The Titan CEO paid for his certainty with his own life. There's this grim kind of classical logic to it. It's almost Greek in its shape. The fallen and the hubristic are the same person. The second face of hubris is the one that destroys the distant and the powerless, the leader who launches a war with confidence that it'll be quick and clean, and then finds himself 5 weeks in with schoolchildren dead and a global oil crisis. In this version, the certainty is held at the top, but the price is paid at the bottom. The decision makers and the consequence bearers are entirely different people. Now, the third one I think is the most chilling, and that is hubris as a deliberate architecture. And this is the Epstein model. It's not about overreach or miscalculation, but it's actually the systemic construction of impunity, a network built specifically to exploit the powerless, protected by mutual complicity, engineered to last, and believing that I cannot be touched. The predation isn't a byproduct of the hubris, it is the point, and it yields grief and outrage. Now, UC Berkeley psychologist Decker Keltner has spent decades studying what he calls the paradox of power. And what he's found is that the qualities that help people rise, which is actually emotional intelligence, the empathy, the social attunement, the genuine desire to make a difference, those are precisely what the experience of holding power erodes. Because the higher you climb, the more the instrument that got you there degrades. So the question underneath all 3 faces of hubris is the same one that every religious tradition observing something sacred this month is asking. Who do you think you are? And who is paying for the answer? Now, there's also this 4th face of hubris, and we're cultivating that on server farms across the United States as we speak. Charles and I recently saw a documentary called The AI Doc, or How I Became an Apocalyptimist, and I highly recommend it. The filmmakers used a term that I think perfectly describes the posture that this moment requires, an apocalyptimist. Not an optimist who believes things are going to always work out, not a pessimist who believes they won't. An apocalyptimist looks at the full range of what's possible, all the promise, all the peril, and chooses to act anyway. Promises of current AI are real and extraordinary, medical breakthroughs, personalized education. There are going to be scientific advances that could extend human life by decades. And I believe in that. But there's other things going on, and that creates the thread that runs from Ocean Gate to Minab, Iran, to Epstein's Island, to those data centers that are humming in a city near you. The people that are building artificial general intelligence rose to this position through exactly the qualities that Keltner was describing: curiosity, collaboration, vision, genuine desire to solve problems for humanity. And now, in the act of holding that power, perhaps the most extraordinary power any humans have ever held, the power to create a new form of intelligence, to create a new life. Paradox of power kicks in. The project suddenly starts to feel more important than the people it's suddenly for. Every society that humanity has ever built has a story about a moment like this. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, the Tower of Babel reaching towards heaven. These stories are not warnings against ambition. They are warnings against ambition without wisdom, against the reach for divine power in the absence of divine accountability. We're attempting to create something in our own image, but the problem is we are not logistical creations. We are emotional ones. And that makes us much more complex. But what we are building with AI is extraordinary at logic, at pattern recognition, at output. What it does not have, and what no one seems to be seriously trying to give it, from what I can tell, is this capacity for genuine compassion. Emotional intelligence is not a software upgrade to add later. It is not a patch. It is a feature in our own human coding that makes us trustworthy to each other. It's what makes the difference between a doctor who sees a patient and one who sees only a diagnosis. It's the difference between justice and mere legal process, between a leader who feels the weight of sending people to war and one who doesn't. We're encoding our logic, yes, but what we are not encoding is our lived wisdom and our emotions. And if Keltner's paradox holds, if the very experience of holding this much power degrades the empathy that made the project worth doing in the first place, then the question isn't only what we're building, it's whether the people building it can still feel the weight of who they're building it for and why they started in the first place. And remember, the Titan's CEO skipped the safety certifications. He was certain it was going to work and that everything would be fine. Now, a few weeks ago, the New York Times columnist David French, who's a conservative Christian, wrote about something spreading through American evangelical Christianity. And it's this idea that empathy itself is a sin, that feeling compassion for migrants, for the poor, for the vulnerable is a form of manipulation that Christians must resist. I want to name what that actually is. The rejection of empathy is not just a theological position. It is actually the permission structure that allows all three faces of hubris to operate without friction. When Keltner's paradox of power erodes empathy in those who hold the power, that is tragedy. When empathy is reframed as a sin for everyone else, that is a system being installed. The powerful, having lost their own capacity for compassion, are now actively working to eliminate it in others. And David French's response in his article, and mine, and the link is in the show notes, the response is that the problem is never too much empathy. The problem is actually selective empathy. We feel deeply for people that are like us and almost nothing for people who aren't. So the solution is actually more empathy applied more consistently and to more people. And I want to remind you about the first of my 5 steps to empathy, which is to dismantle judgment. And that means pausing before you render a verdict, before you decide what you already know, and instead ask what you don't know. What shaped this person that's in front of you? What might it feel like to be them? You see, dismantling judgment is not a passive act. It is actually a discipline. And in this particular moment, it is also a form of defiance. It's a refusal to have your compassion managed out of you by people who benefit from your indifference. Now, on Wednesday night, 4 astronauts were beginning their journey to the moon, and President Trump was addressing the nation about the Iran war, and both things happened. Same night, same planet, same species. The question in front of all of us, not just the leaders, but all of us, is the same question that every tradition observing something sacred this month is asking. Who do we want to be? I choose the moon. Who's with me? Now, in the full newsletter, which is linked below, I've got 3 specific things that you can do this week. The very quick version: 1, ask the harder question. 2, say something about AI to your company, your community, call your elected representatives, and let this week's convergence mean something. Easter, Passover, if you observe either of those traditions, let this be the year that you take really seriously and to heart what they are actually asking. And if you don't observe them, the message is the same. Every society humanity has built across centuries and cultures centers compassion as the measure of a life. Not certainty, not power, but compassion. So that's what I've got for you this Easter weekend. It's a heavy week. It's also a beautiful week. There are 4 human beings that are somewhere between here and the moon right now. And let's be worthy of that. If this resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe if you haven't. There are new issues and editions of Reading Between the Lines that drop every 2 weeks. So happy Easter, happy Passover, and to everybody, happy spring. I'm Rob Volpe. Stay curious, ask good questions, and let the empathy follow. Take care.